The billionaire had everything money could buy, yet on the morning he was expected to die, there was no one sitting beside his hospital bed. No wife. No children. No friends. Not even a business partner willing to hold his trembling hand. Outside his private hospital suite, his name was worth billions, but inside that quiet room, he was nothing more than an old man struggling to breathe. Then the door opened, and a black single father walked in carrying a small paper bag, unaware that the simple kindness he was about to show would change both their lives forever. If you believe that kindness can reach even the hardest heart and that everyone deserves a second chance, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Because sometimes, the person who saves us isn't the person we expected to meet. The dying billionaire was named Alistair Vane, a 76-year-old businessman whose empire stretched across hotels, shipping companies, technology firms, and luxury real estate. Newspapers had once called him one of the most powerful men in the country. His photograph had appeared on magazine covers, beside headlines describing his ruthless negotiations and unbelievable wealth. But now, lying beneath a white hospital blanket in the warm afternoon sunlight, Alistair could barely recognize the man in those photographs. His hands shook when he tried to lift a glass of water. His once commanding voice had become a faint whisper. His doctors had explained that his heart was failing, and despite every expensive treatment available, there was little time left. His lawyers had come and gone, arguing quietly about his estate. His executives were busy protecting the company. His distant relatives were already discussing inheritance. But nobody had asked him the one question that suddenly mattered more than money: whether he was afraid. Across town, Jalen Mercer, a 38-year-old single father, was rushing through the bright morning streets with his 9-year-old daughter, Sarai, beside him. Jalen worked as a hospital maintenance technician, fixing broken equipment, repairing doors, carrying supplies, and doing whatever needed to be done. He wasn't wealthy. He lived in a modest apartment, drove an aging car, and sometimes counted every dollar before buying groceries. Since his wife had passed away several years earlier, Jalen had raised Sarai alone. Life had not been gentle with him, but somehow he had refused to become bitter. That morning, Sarai had insisted that he bring a small paper bag to the hospital. Inside were 2 oatmeal cookies she had baked before school, slightly burnt around the edges but carefully wrapped in a napkin. She had told her father that everyone deserved something homemade when they were having a bad day. Jalen was passing Alistair's private room when he noticed the door was partly open. Through the gap, he saw the old man struggling to reach a glass of water that had fallen just beyond his fingertips. Jalen stopped immediately. He entered, picked up the glass, helped Alistair drink, adjusted his pillow, and checked the medical monitor. Alistair stared at him with tired suspicion. He was accustomed to people entering his room because they wanted something from him. Lawyers wanted signatures. Doctors wanted decisions. Relatives wanted promises. Employees wanted reassurance. But this stranger had simply walked in because he saw someone struggling. Jalen noticed the untouched breakfast tray and asked if Alistair wanted anything. The old billionaire shook his head. Jalen then remembered the paper bag in his pocket. He opened it and placed one of Sarai's imperfect cookies on the bedside table. Alistair looked at the cookie as though it were something completely foreign. Jalen explained that his daughter had made it that morning and believed food tasted better when someone made it with love. For the first time that day, something changed in Alistair's expression. His eyes remained fixed on the cookie, and his breathing became uneven. He quietly admitted that nobody had cooked anything for him in years. Jalen didn't know what to say, so he simply sat beside the bed for a few minutes. There was no business conversation, no request for money, and no attempt to impress him. Just silence shared between 2 men whose lives could not have been more different. Over the next several days, Jalen continued checking on Alistair during his breaks. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he brought stories about Sarai's school projects. Once, he brought a ridiculous drawing she had made of their family, where her father had enormous muscles and a bright red cape. Alistair began smiling again. He started asking about Sarai. He wanted to know what she dreamed of becoming, what books she liked, and what made her laugh. Jalen slowly discovered that beneath the billionaire's cold reputation was a lonely man carrying a lifetime of regret. One afternoon, Alistair finally confessed the truth. He had spent his entire life believing that love was something people gave only when they wanted something in return. His father had taught him that weakness was dangerous. His first wife had left after years of emotional distance. His only son had died young after the two of them had fought over the future of the company. Alistair had spent decades building his fortune while convincing himself that providing money was the same as providing love. By the time he understood the difference, it was too late. His son had been gone for 15 years, and Alistair had never forgiven himself. Jalen listened without judging him. Then he told Alistair something that stayed with the old man long after the conversation ended. Regret could not change yesterday, but it could still change what a person did with today. Jalen encouraged him to stop measuring his life by the size of his fortune and start measuring it by the lives he could still touch. Alistair looked toward the window where sunlight poured across the floor and quietly began to cry. The billionaire who had terrified boardrooms, defeated competitors, and controlled billions of dollars was now crying because one ordinary father had reminded him that his life could still have meaning. The following morning, Alistair asked his attorneys to cancel several complicated inheritance arrangements. Instead, he ordered the creation of a foundation dedicated to helping single parents afford childcare, education, and emergency housing. He also instructed his company to establish a scholarship in his late son's name. But the biggest surprise came when he asked Jalen to help oversee the foundation. Jalen initially refused, believing he wasn't qualified. Alistair insisted that qualifications could be hired, but compassion could not be purchased. Weeks later, Alistair's health worsened. Jalen sat beside him during a bright afternoon, holding his hand while Sarai placed another homemade cookie on the table. Alistair could barely speak, but his eyes were peaceful. He looked at the cookie, then at Jalen, and tears rolled slowly down his cheeks. He had spent a lifetime believing that billions of dollars could protect him from loneliness. In the end, it was a tired single father with an old car, a modest home, and a child's imperfect cookie who gave him something his fortune never could, the feeling that he mattered. Alistair passed away that evening with sunlight shining through the hospital window. He did not die surrounded by executives or lawyers. He died with Jalen beside him, Sarai's drawing resting on the bedside table, and the hand of someone who had never asked him for a single thing. Months later, the foundation began changing thousands of lives. Single mothers received housing. Fathers received childcare assistance. Children received scholarships. And every year, on the anniversary of Alistair's passing, Jalen and Sarai returned to the same hospital room where an old billionaire had learned the true meaning of wealth. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Your support helps these stories reach someone who may need a little hope today. Special request: comment, kindness still matters, if you believe one small act of compassion can change a person's entire life. Because in the end, Alistair Vane discovered something that money had hidden from him for decades. A person can spend a lifetime building a fortune, but the greatest wealth is knowing that, when your final moment comes, someone will care enough to hold your hand.